You're listening to the Marketing Attractions Podcast. Conversations on how nonprofit attractions are increasing attendance and sharing their missions through marketing. Your hosts are Ryan Dick and Jenny Williams of Attend Media.
Jenny, today's topic is 4 steps for rebranding a nonprofit attraction. And we're going to bring in a guest on this one, Nancie McDonnell-Reuter. She is the CEO and founder of Noetic Consultants. They're based out of DC, and they've been in the game for the last 22 years.
Yeah, excited to talk to Nancie. They just recently went through a kind of brand refresh with a large zoo. So we're going to talk to her about that process that she took the zoo through. I think some of the interesting things that, speaking from someone on more of the execution side, right? So after this brand refresh has been done, is like, now what? How do we get it in market? We're often given kind of some basic information. Every client's going to provide us a budget. They're going to provide us a target audience. They're going to provide us maybe some, some research that's been done, flighting information, right? Like basic stuff that you get in a brief. But I think what we miss a lot is, who are you as a brand? What are you trying to represent? How do we bring this into our media mix? Because it does actually impact our channel selection. It impacts what we're trying to align with. How are we trying to be really effective with our audience, not just efficient? So I think those are some of the things we'll talk about, right? How to best download all of your partners and how to ensure you don't have everybody just going off in their own way, right? Creative's not going off on one route. Media's not going off on one route. Other partners aren't going off on their own. So that you've got strategy that's really kind of crossing all channels, all partners. I think a good example that comes to mind here is in the media world, we get really frustrated when budgets are small, but all of a sudden we have a TV spot that's been created. So how do we avoid getting to that point when you've done all of this work on this brand refresh and now you're in the execution phase, and ensuring that all your partners are downloaded properly?
All right, let's get into it. All right, Nancie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. So delighted to be here.
All right, so why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you guys do for nonprofit attractions?
Yes, happy to. So we're a marketing consultancy. Our primary services are around market research, branding, training, and coaching. We are not totally industry specific, but attractions are very much an area of passion and expertise for us. And one of the things I do want to mention to your listeners is that if people are thinking about their brand, their brand as an attraction, we have a very useful tool to help you really look at and diagnose the strength of your brand. It's called the Brand Health Diagnostic. It's available on our website, noeticconsultants.com. I know you'll put it in the show notes as well. It only takes a few minutes to go through it, but it often does provide some really good insight if you're an attraction that's thinking about the strength of your brand and how you're showing up in the market.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. Now, I know you guys recently have done some work with a fairly large zoo. I was kind of hoping we can have this conversation with that lens in mind. Walk us through why a zoo, a garden, a museum, an aquarium would engage with somebody like you guys. When does an attraction know we might need a refresh or even a total rebrand?
Yeah. It's a great question. How do you know? How do you know when it's needed? If you were even just thinking, writ large, like attractions and every other company out there, there are just times when you really need to refresh who you are, and there's times you need to transform who you are. But particular to the attraction space and knowing that we're talking about very place-based at the end of the day, it's really about an experience. So some of the things that you may see as being problematic and would help you know that your brand needs work. First and foremost, how are what we'll call your brand assets? So how consistent is the look and feel of your logo, your signage, your website, your social, all the different ways you promote yourselves? Has it sprawled into a bunch of different kinds of looks and feels, which can happen when brand hasn't had attention in a while? So that can be a very strong indicator. The particular large zoo that you were referring to, that was one of their big pain points when we went into the brand work with them. You also may have acquired some other entities and you may lack cohesion. That was also an issue for the zoo that you were speaking of. Your audience may have changed. Maybe they're aging up or aging down. Their preferences have changed, what they expect. Maybe you lack modernization, like you just look a little older and you really need a shot of modernizing in there. And you may see signs like your membership is struggling. Competition may have grown up around you. And I do want to mention on the point of competition that competition really is anything where people are spending their leisure time, right? Or their travel time if they're coming into your city. So if competition has changed, that may also be a trigger. So it may be any combination of those things, or it may just be one of those things that helps you know that your brand needs some TLC.
Yeah, I like what you said there. We had a guest on, one of our first early episodes, and he said, people can do literally anything else besides come to your attraction.
Yeah.
And if you kind of look at it at that lens, like, yeah, your competition is the movies, it's Netflix, it's going to the park, it's doing anything besides spending money to walk through your gates.
That's exactly right. Right. And whether they're coming to your city or they're in your city, that's true.
So, okay, we're going to go through this process with you guys over at No Edit Consultants, and I'm thinking this is going to take like 2 hours. Right?
Yeah, that's funny.
No, like seriously,
like how long? A little bit longer than that, right? And it will depend how long it takes. I would speak to that in terms of ranges. It depends on whether or not you're doing like refinement, like a refresh, or you're really needing to transform. So if you're doing something that's more around refinement, there are steps that you still need to take to do it well and do it right. So I would say like 3 to 6 months is what you're looking at. If it's something more dramatic than that, you're looking at 6 months plus. You may be looking at a year. It was about a year with the large zoo that we worked with recently, and that was a pretty significant lift for the brand.
And I know we're going to kind of break down your process in just a minute, but kind of just thinking about that beginning, who should be in that room? Who should have a voice in this type of conversation? Is it everybody? Is it just two people? What does that look like?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I think this is an area that doesn't necessarily get thought through from the get-go. Oftentimes, the marketing folks are the ones who are spearheading. And, the thought is, okay, we just need a working team here. The truth is that brand needs to be a team sport, meaning ultimately what you do to reimagine or refresh that brand needs to live and breathe inside the bodies of all the people that are part of your organization. If you think about a fantastic experience that you've ever had, perhaps, with a really strong brand, perhaps it was going to a Ritz-Carlton, or perhaps it was going to an Apple store, where you really felt like a part of things. That is because there's so much effort going into helping everybody embody who the brand is. So at a practical level, you do need a working team. We strongly encourage that to be cross-functional so that you're getting alignment and buy-in and good fodder from key stakeholders. You need to be super thoughtful about how you're involving your board. You need to involve your donors. You need to involve your members. So you really need to take it broad. And then ultimately, when you're taking it down to what is that expression going to be, that's what you're going to take back to that working team.
Okay, so Nancie, I'm, in the leadership team at a large zoo. I'm like, we need a total brand refresh here. We're ready. We're in the transformation phase, right? We know we've got that 6 to 12 month timeline to really kind of redo everything. We're a little outdated, whatever it is, right? So you've really got this 4-step process that you take brands through. Why don't you walk us through each one of those? Let's start with your first step, really what you're calling this kind of North Star element.
Yes, sure. So we refer to this as a brand building framework. So for your listeners, picture a wheel that starts in a space that we call defining the North Star. So the defining the North Star is really looking at the organizational elements that really make the organization tick. So things like your core values, your strategic plan, your purpose, your vision, your mission. These are aspects that really need to be squared away before you embark on making any kind of changes to the brand, because they are your foundation. And oftentimes the work needs to start there if those aspects, again, are out of date or non-existent, or they're words on a page, but they're not being really lived. And so that's the first stage. The second stage is, with that squared away, you really do need to get into the aspects of defining or redefining the brand. And a really key part of this is doing research. And I say that knowing full well that, there's an awful lot of attractions out there that do not have a lot of dollars to invest in research. But there are many scrappy ways you can do research that don't require a lot of hard cost, but require just, people's time investment. And I strongly encourage listeners to not skip that step. So this is where you are gaining information via research about, how do people regard you today? What do they value about you? What do they wish about you? So that you're not creating or recreating how you're speaking about yourself as a brand without having that as your basis. You're not making it up, but instead you're basing it off of research. And ideally that would be a combination of qualitative and quantitative research. So, small sample qualitative where you're more high touch, quantitative where you're surveying. But again, if you're in that more like DIY space, you have to be scrappy about how you're getting it done, but there are some very clever ways you can get it done without spending a lot of money. And then that becomes the aspect that helps you in this second stage, which we call define the brand. So you're going to be defining, some people use the term brand positioning or unique value proposition. So really getting to that, what I'll just call the core promise of who you are for and what you will deliver, and the reasons that people can believe it to be true. So I'm using, brand positioning, brand promise interchangeably there. That then brings us to the third component, which is personally my favorite, which we call bringing it to life. And the reason that it's my favorite is because this is the really juicy place where you take those really good words and that really good learning that you've codified and you get it mobilized internal to the organization and external to the organization. Now, at Noetic, we help with the internal work. So we're helping activate throughout the organization, and we have various mechanisms to do that so that you can have that experience like you would when you walk into that Ritz-Carlton, or like when you walk into that Apple store, where everyone is knowing it and embodying it so that the people who are experiencing you can feel it. But then there's this whole world of the external expression. And this is where we would have all the different promotional elements, the refresh of the brand assets, the media and channel selection. And I think, the two of you know this space very well because this is more the space that you're in. So that's the third stage.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to call out, right? So on our end, especially on the paid media side, it tends to be, hey, here's your brief. It's a target audience. It's some flight dates and a budget, right? We always get that basic information. But if you've just gone through this huge, year-long process, or, this is a stage within that year-long process, right? We want to know, as that media partner, I feel jealous that the creative partners always get this information, but we don't always get it on the media side of, what is this entire process that you just went through for this rebrand or refresh, right? So understanding who you are as a brand, who you're trying to be, helps us with those media placements, because it's not just spots and dots, right? It's about ensuring that we have the right contextual alignments that are going to, resonate with an audience, not just what's the cheapest place that we can run media. It's got to be effective and efficient, right? So,
absolutely. And that's why the bringing it to life is such a juicy part of the process, because you really do need to align that internal and external. And I I grew up in advertising, and I was always taught that like the creative and the media have to come together in the best mix to get your customers of whatever kind in the right spaces and at the right times. And so in order for that to really come together, that channel selection needs to be as thoughtful as the creative itself and as the brand words and meaning that are going into that. So all of those things have to come together.
Yeah. And I think when we think of that creative and media, they're oftentimes working in tandem of each other, but they have to ensure that they're not working in silos, right? So how's that strategy coming together to ensure that someone's not just going off and creating this beautiful TV spot when the media plan is going to say, or the media strategy is going to say, that's just not an effective way to reach this audience, right? Maybe instead of a full 30-second, we need a series of short form video that can tell the same story, but we can now execute all of this in a social channel or a digital channel, right? So it's something that we're big on. We want to make sure that everyone's working together to deliver not only the best creative, but the best plan to support this brand mission really that's been developed, not just a beautiful spot, right? Which is so great, but it's got to tell more than that.
Yeah. And that idea of the partners coming together there again, this is why stage 3 is so juicy, because that doesn't just happen by happenstance. I mean, if you think about it, you probably have various partners helping you if you're in attraction, and you as that head of marketing within the attraction itself are probably that coordinator and that traffic cop across. And really the best thing you can do is ensure that all those partners are going to play really nicely and really closely together. The more you can integrate the partners themselves, and that may sound awkward, but just do it because it's going to serve the brand the best. And any partner who is worthwhile is going to understand that and value that and play really nicely with everyone else, because you need such a thoughtful handoff in that space. I have seen clients struggle with the handoff when they have had partners that are working in a more disparate way. So the people coming together across the entities is really critical as well.
And how are you helping clients do this part, right? Is there maybe situations where you're involved in this handoff and working with all of the partners, and other situations where maybe you're a little bit more hands off and just set the client up to do this? How does that process differ for you?
Yeah, we try to stay alongside and as close as clients will be open to our doing. And so we start talking about these aspects way at the beginning, so that we're asking those questions and really getting clients to think about it. I think the gravitational pull for marketers inside organizations and attractions, perhaps especially, is to think more about like, I have to stand up this brand, but not spending as much time thinking about like, what do I do with it once I get it stood up? And so we ask these questions really early on, like, how are you thinking about the activation side of things? Do you have partners already? How much of that do you envision handling yourselves? How much of that do you think do you need help finding partners? So we ask those questions right up front. And I do want to mention, I can never leave a loop untied, that I didn't touch on the fourth aspect of the brand building process, which is optimizing and measuring over time. And so as you're doing that bring to life, you also need to be thinking through, like, how are we going to make sure that we are making the impact that we are seeking? And there again, it is the internal and the external. So you need to have measurement that is going to really look at how is this whole thing coming together. So not just measuring, for example, campaign effectiveness, but also measuring employee engagement, employee understanding and buy-in to the brand and its meaning. So having really thoughtful metrics so you know what you need to be pressing into, because it's never set it and forget it. Organizations that stand up the brand or refresh the brand shouldn't look at it as a project. It's something that always needs care, which is why we show it in a wheel, because it spins back around, and you always need to be caring for the various aspects.
You're listening to the Marketing Attractions Podcast, conversations on how nonprofit attractions are increasing attendance and sharing their mission through marketing. Your hosts are Ryan Dick and Jenny Williams of Attend Media. Attend Media is a media planning and buying agency specializing in zoos, aquariums, gardens, and museums. For more information, please visit attend.media. Now, back to Ryan and Jenny.
All right, Nancie. So you just walked through those 4 steps of rebranding or refreshing an attraction. Let me kind of just recap those. So number 1 is finding that North Star, right? Defining or redefining that mission, that vision, that purpose. Number 2, what you're calling brand distinction. And you're saying that really begins with research, whether that's done just internally with the institution or they're tapping the services of somebody like y'all. Number 3, bringing that all to life. And then number 4, measurement, right? We love measurement. Right. Let's go back to that number 2, that brand distinction. This is looking at guest surveys, community surveys, maybe doing internal work with CEOs, stakeholders, board members. Is that right?
Yes. So we do recommend, again, don't skip it. So whether you're hiring someone outside to help you or not, we typically like to look at it as internal into external, meaning we would start with stakeholder interviews. So stakeholder interviews would be one-on-one discussions that you would have with people across functions who are in a fairly senior position with a questionnaire. And you might have board members in that. You're likely to have some donors in that. You're going to have some people sitting in, senior levels in functions. Then you're going to work your way into the external, and that's where you would get into things like member surveying, donor surveying. You may choose to do something that you stand up in social, or you may decide to do it. You can even intercept people at your attraction and do short surveying on the fly in that way. I'll give you a tangible example from this zoo that we have just concluded this work with. So we started with internal stakeholder interviews there, worked our way into the guest surveying. And we also did a good deal of what I'll just call desktop research. So getting online and really understanding the competitive landscape and how people were spending their time and what options were available to them. And then we visually mapped that. And the combination of all of that, of talking to people internally, externally, and then doing this desktop research was really what enabled us to bubble up their positioning. And I'll just share briefly that it really comes down to what people value so much about them is this very thoughtful combination of it being an educational place and being an entertaining place. So what we could call edutainment is a way of pulling that together. And that became the basis for the positioning itself and became really key to all the focus of all the ways in which that external promotion is now happening in the refresh of the brand, and also how they are approaching everything that one experiences with the attraction. And that's why I say don't skip it, because the research is really what helps you uncover what is the gem that you are. It's not about recreating something new that you're not and wish you would be, but it's really through the eyes of the people who know you inside and outside.
So kind of taking some of that research a step further. So you've got kind of step 2 with your research is in step 2, but then you've got research obviously coming back in or surveying, ongoing survey coming in your measurement piece. And I think, when you say the word scrappy, my mind goes to what most cultural attractions are doing when it comes to research, which is guest surveys, right? But talk to us about how maybe that guest survey might differ from that upfront kind of phase 2 research versus an ongoing survey. What am I asking? Am I asking them hey, what do you think about your visit? What kind of questions might be different between that stage?
Yeah, I'm thinking survey was were the trash cans clean and how long did you wait in line, right? What is the deeper level that you guys are going into?
Right. I think you can think about it. One way to think about it is caring for the here and now and most recent visit, and then caring for the longer term and how I feel about the organization overall. And so the best surveys, to your question, Jenny, are caring for both. And then you would pulse that over time to see where are the changes. So having questions about, when was your most recent visit? What did you appreciate most? Was there anything you'd want to change? And if so, what, right? All of that is absolutely well worth the learning. But then also adding in things like, perhaps on a scale, how warmly do you regard this fill in the blank, this zoo? How do you feel about recommending it as a place to visit to others? If you had a choice between this and other places you could spend your time, where would this fall in your list of priorities, right? These are more what I would call brand questions. They get at things like affinity and loyalty. And when you look at things like that, those things aren't going to change quickly. Those things are going to change more over time. And so you want to keep those questions in the mix so you can look over time to see, are we going up? Are we going down? Are we staying the same? I'll give you a quick, just one of the most fascinating examples in my career, honestly, back in time when Samsung was able to compete really for the first time with Apple in mobile phone devices. Their brand metrics showed that people had very high awareness of them, but very low affinity. In other words, everybody knew Samsung, but nobody really cared for it. So that was key to their figuring out, okay, how as a brand do we make ourselves relevant and meaningful to the people that we are seeking to do so with? So there are more long-term measures, and having those questions in the mix anytime you're surveying, and you can do the both in one survey. It doesn't have to be separate.
All right, Nancie. So I'm a zoo, I'm a garden. I'm thinking about going through this process. It's been a few years. My creative assets are all over the place. I'm going to engage.
You're a mess. You're just a mess.
I'm a big old mess. How did you know? I'm going to engage with some outside help to help walk the organization through this brand refresh, this total rebrand, wherever we land on with this. What should I do? And I'm thinking, if it's a nonprofit attraction, there's going to be an RFP.
Yes. And in fact, most attractions have to RFP.
Yeah.
So, let's just assume that's the world. So I have some very strong opinions in this space that I hope will actually help make the process easier for the people who need to do this. Because the RFP process, it's just a bear. It's a lot to manage. And ultimately, doing it in a certain kind of way can help you get to a great partner. But when it becomes too complex, it can help you actually partner with someone that you barely know. So that's what we want to avoid. So my first bit of guidance is really keep those potential partners close. Don't invite so many. I would say 3 is ideal, 5 is max. Don't invite so many that you can't actually really get to know them. So that's first and foremost, because the more you have, the more you're going to worry about leveling the playing field, the more you're going to have them in a distance, won't serve you well in terms of picking a partner. Secondly, in the written RFP request, try to keep it simple. Ideally, don't have it go on for pages and pages, and hand it off to at least one, if not a handful of people, and have them read it and tell you what they think it says. It's really hard to write a clear RFP. And the best way to know how clear it is to hand it to somebody who doesn't know you yet and ask this person, what do you think this says? And then hone it from there. Also within the RFP, I highly recommend that you don't prescribe the path. So like if you think that you need to start with those organizational elements, like say what you need, but don't tell the potential partner how to do it. Why do I say that? Because different potential partners are going to have different approaches. And by seeing their approach in what they submit to you, you're going to see their way of thinking. And you're going to see how much do they How closely do they partner? How much do they work on alignment? How do they involve the board, or do they? How do they do the research? And so let them be themselves so that you can find the best match for you. Lastly, I think that it's really important to have a way of bringing in objectivity. So we highly recommend that you have a rubric. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but just have a set of criteria that you're going to grade against, while also giving people an opportunity to make their, color commentary. But having that criteria agreed can help you get away from just that purely subjective, like, well, I just really liked those people. Like, they were just really nice to talk to, right? You need to be looking, that is an important aspect, but you also need to be looking at things like, did they listen well? Did they hit all the different aspects? Were they within our budget range, et cetera?
Yeah, that rubric idea, is that because there's like multiple people making the decision?
Right. Yes. It's both. It's because there's going to be multiple people weighing in. Inevitably, you may have people also who have brought in a partner that they worked with in the past. So people are going to have their biases. But then also it's helping you just care for that objectivity around, what do we really need in a partner? What are those key aspects? So have that conversation and set the rubric before you're looking at submissions.
Yeah, I love what you said. Don't invite so many that you can't get to know them. I think that's so important. And sometimes to a client, it might come if you're like, there's so many involved. I, as the respondent, might not want to be involved in this. It could come across almost like, well, if my chances aren't high, then I'm not going to even participate. But what it really is as the respondent, you want to get to know the client, and the client needs to get to know everyone who's responding to this RFP, right? So I love how you put it there. That's just so important for both parties to be able to get to know each other through that process.
You're actually making me think of one other tip, which is if you put an RFP out and you're finding that those that you invited are not accepting the invitation, or if you just, put it out in a public way and you're getting very few, response back and hand raising that people want to participate, there's probably something wrong with that RFP. Maybe you're asking for the moon and you only have $5. Maybe your RFP was 20 pages long. I mean, I'm being dramatic, right? But organizations worth their weight are being discerning about where they spend the time. It's a lot of time and resources to bid. And so if there's something about it that just doesn't add up, they may respectfully decline. If that happens to you, if you're not getting the response you think, reach out to those partners who have respectfully declined and ask them why. They'll tell you. And then you can fix it.
Okay, Nancie. So I've gone through the RFP process. I've selected somebody like you.
Or me.
I've gone through this 3, 6, 12-month long process. Like, tell me, you guys are riding off into the sunset. What do I get? And how do I maximize the time, effort, and financial investment that my institution has made in a partner like yours? Like, what does the end game look like?
Yeah, and this is where standing up the measurement is so important because it's so foundational to so many different aspects of the organization. So what you should be getting is the ability for people to consider you, the people that you are trying to attract are actually attracted, and that when they come, they are delighted and want to come again. So you should see all the boats rise. You should be seeing people coming and you should see in those surveys an uptick in so many of your measures. And it should be both in those longer term measures that we talked about a few minutes ago, as well as in my most recent visit, because you have that refreshed sense and there's an excitement around that, and that's being delivered by the people who are delivering the actual experience. So it should be striking positive impact in every aspect of the organization. I know that sounds really big, but it is that big.
Well, Nancie, thank you so much for your time. It was great to have you here. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I would love to hear from your listeners. So LinkedIn is a great place to get me, Nancie McDonnell Reuter, or you can go to our page, which is Noetic Consultants. Our site is noeticonsultants.com. And that brand health diagnostic assessment that I mentioned that can help you know whether or not your brand does need strengthening is on the site. And I know you'll also put that in the show notes. That can be a great place to start. If you think that you might have some challenges that you want to strengthen around your brand, it just really makes you have a think about what are those aspects that may be a question. And I'd love to hear from your folks.
Nancie, awesome. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Marketing Attractions Podcast. If you have a suggestion for a topic or would like to be a guest on the show, please visit our website at marketingattractionspodcast.com.